Hello, I'm David Wilcock, and welcome to another episode of Cosmic Disclosure, because you need to know. In this episode, we are going to pick up where we left off with this remarkable insider who we have privilege and pleasure of speaking to, none other than Goode, who is claiming to have worked in something we are calling the secret space program. This would be the military-industrial complex, industrializing and building out colonies in our solar system and beyond. And it is a fascinating story because it lines up with information that I received from insiders that I have been in contact with for the better part of 20 years. Most of these people never came forward. I withheld the information from the internet, and that makes it very easy to tell when someone else comes along who is speaking about the same things that I'd already heard. And I'm very delighted to have the opportunity now to finally be able to talk about so many things that were not allowed to be spoken of before, and to have Corey here for the show. So Corey, thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you.
We talked about Operation High Jump. We talked about the effort that was made to try to bust up a German cell in Antarctica, and that they encountered some pretty stiff resistance there. So I guess to start this off, what was the first method that they used to achieve spaceflight?
In the beginning, they had success with their own engineers developing technology from their own engineering feats, as well as they had been scouring the East for ancient texts that they had been told about and channelings from what they were led to believe or what could be off-world beings, that some of the esoteric German secret society groups were dabbling in. And this led some of the other secret society groups to go on expeditions looking for these ancient Eastern texts.
Where did they believe these texts were located? Were there a variety of locations?
A variety of locations, these being in the Tibetan areas, the areas of India. A lot of people have heard the stories of ancient flying devices that had very advanced weaponry.
The Vimana.
Yeah, the Vimana. And it read like science fiction, but was many tens of thousands of years old. And Western scholars wrote it off as fiction, science fiction ahead of its time. These German groups, they believed more in the marriage of science and esoteric beliefs. And they decided that they would follow these leads that they had received through channelings and go and locate these texts.
Did the beings that were doing the channeling give them specific coordinates of where these texts would be located?
Yes.
Really?
They told them that they were under certain mountain ranges in certain areas that had at one time been a part of a more advanced civilization, had been forgotten by modern man, that a lot of the religious caste monks knew about it and had guarded it as part of their secret teachings.
You and I spoke in previous episodes at quite some length about these Agarthans, and you said it was a group that was blonde Nordics that were living inside the Earth.
Some of them, yeah.
Some of them live inside the Earth?
Some of them were blonde Nordics.
Oh. And you said that the Germans preferred to work with them over the Draco reptilian types.
Correct.
So why would the Agarthans I'm assuming, first of all, the Agarthans are the ones that were channeling through these secret societies, or is that not true?
That's a hard one to speculate on, because Auric and these different groups seem to have been in contact with several different groups.
Several different ET groups.
Extraterrestrial groups, and also ancient Earth breakaway groups. So it's hard to pinpoint which information came from which groups. When back in the late 30s, I believe it was, they were asked to draw a picture of who they were communicating with. Mm-hmm. And the drawing of the head and the facial features of this being.
It's a creepy looking face.
Yes, and had very interesting similar characteristics to Gray's.
Yes, it does. But the eyes aren't as big.
Right.
But the head is really large, and then it's got this tiny little chin.
Right.
Yeah.
But the Germans were led to go out to the Himalayan mountain areas, to go on massive expeditions out east to recover these documents, and to do so in a not so ethical way. They were going to these villages and these monasteries, and basically at gunpoint taking these scrolls and books and taking them back to Germany.
Are you saying that the texts that were in question were located in Tibetan Buddhist type monasteries?
Mm-hmm. A lot of them were, and a lot of them were also in cave systems that had purposely been, these texts had been put in them, and they had been sealed in mountains.
In the event that they got into one of these cave systems, would there be indications that what they were looking at was a remnant of an advanced civilization beyond just finding a cache of documents?
Well, directly from what I read in the smart glass pads, these were wooden, similar to bookshelves, but were lined with tons of scrolls and bound books. And a lot of them had medicine type of information. I mean, all different types of, I guess, secret teachings and secret medicines and secret technology information.
Were these natural caverns, or did it have some of that sort of smoothing out feature like you get with the ancient builder race stuff you talked about before?
These were natural caverns.
Natural caverns.
Yes.
Okay.
And when these certain books were spirited away back to Germany, when they opened them and began to look at them, the German engineers were shocked to see that these were blueprints,
really?
Technological blueprints.
When you say scroll, though, my visual would be that we're looking at some aged, crumbling piece of browning paper.
Well, some of them were scrolls, some of them were actually bound books.
Like a leather bound, or?
Yeah, like leather, animal skin bound books. These are more of scribed texts and books that were handed down over generations. People would scribe them exactly as the other text was, and then at a certain point they were sealed away or put into a monastery.
So we're not talking about books where the pages are made of like a Kevlar indestructible material. It's just paper.
Right.
So what did these technical diagrams, you're saying, when you say blueprints, was it like the power system for the craft? What did it actually, what was the illustration of?
Much of it they had to decipher over time, but it was the beginning of the electrogravitic craft that later on the West called it alien reproduction vehicles. What they were Mercury spinning mercury vortex-driven vehicles that created lift, electrogravitic lift. And it was very simple concepts, but very complicated concepts at the same time. And once the German scientists got a hold of it and married it with what they were already working on, they were able to jump leaps and bounds ahead of where they were in a short period of time.
Was there a familiarity to the language of the book, or did they have to actually learn the language?
That was one of the largest hurdles to get over. And they brought some very uncooperative, I guess you would say, volunteers from that region back with them to help them in the deciphering of the text.
You're saying Tibetans?
Yeah, well, Tibetans and people that were guarding the knowledge.
Oh, wow.
And they use these people to help them translate as much of it as they could. A lot of this stuff, these people had been scribing for generations, but even they had lost the original meaning of what they were transcribing.
So the books have been copied over?
Many
blueprints
times.
And diagrams.
But the Germans were very intelligent, very resourceful, and they were able to use these diagrams, create their own experiments, and figure it out.
Some people are going to be questioning what groups we're talking about. There's like a Thule Society, Thule. Would that be one of them?
The Thule Society, the Order of the Black Sun, the Vril Society, and there are about a handful of other different societies that are not really well known. And a lot of these ones that we mentioned worked together when it was logical to, to further their technological development, and then would keep their own secrets. Some of them had much more advanced technology than the other societies.
Were the members of these societies also in control of German industrial conglomerates like IG Farben, stuff like that? Corporations?
These groups were always in control of the money. They were always in control of the corporations. They were not always in control totally of the government.
I see.
They had infiltrated the government and were working in the government, but the government did not know what these societies and groups were doing. They knew what a lot of what the Order of the Black Sun groups were doing, because they were using military applications with a lot of the stuff they were developing for the war effort. But it was pretty well known that none of this technology was really going to be serviceable and ready to deploy by the end of the war.
When we're describing this process of document acquisition that was going on, you mentioned India and you mentioned Tibet. Mm-hmm. What are the years that we're talking about, and were there any other geographical regions besides India and Tibet where
China,
this was being done?
Yes.
China. Okay.
China, India, Tibet, all of these modern ancient civilizations.
Did it all cluster around the Himalayas in that part of the world?
Yes.
Okay.
And
what were the years in question?
1918, 1919.
Okay.
But then the 1920s, 30s, it started exponentially growing, and most of it was in the 1930s and 40s. But most of it was heavily in the 1930s that they were really doing a lot of this work.
I have heard from other scholars that one of the things that the Germans were looking for were pieces of material that they felt had esoteric power, like the spear that penetrated Jesus' body, which they apparently were calling the spear of destiny, or something like the so-called fountain of youth, which most people think is a joke?
That was another break-off group that the getting into the, I guess, the more, during the World War II, the four-letter Nazi word, that group, they started sending them off looking for religious artifacts that had power. And they weren't just Judeo-Christian artifacts. They were looking for all sorts of ancient religious artifacts that they believed were rooted in either ancient breakaway technology, Earth breakaway technology, or ancient alien ET technology, some of which are the ancient builders race. They were wanting to get their hands on it for several reasons. Some of them believed that having possession of these materials would, according to the legends, would ensure their victory. And also, some of the ETs that they were in contact with wanted these technologies, especially the ancient builder race technologies. And that has gone up close to current era until we figured out that some of what these tablets or stones that look like just relics, ancient stone relics that looked benign, we finally figured out that they were actually technologies that worked on a multidimensional level, very, very advanced.
Right.
And they were trading these off with ET groups for technology and for the ETs to come down and give material support.
Now, if people are watching all the shows that I've been working on here at GAIM, one of the things they will have seen is disclosure episodes where I'm interviewing Graham Hancock. And we had, I believe, an entire episode just devoted to the Ark of the Covenant. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the classic Spielberg film Raiders of the Lost Ark is about the Ark of the Covenant, that Harrison Ford's character is looking for the Ark. Did you encounter any information on your own that the Ark of the Covenant was real, or that the German groups were looking for it?
Well, according to the smart glass pads, there were 3 Ark of the Covenant.
3 Arks of the Covenant. I hadn't heard that before.
There were 3 of them.
Wow.
And they were devices that were housed in some sort of wood that was covered in gold as a shielding from the radiation. It's not exactly the radiation we think of as in radioactive bombs, but you know, even light bulbs, there's something radiating from them. So radiation can mean all sorts of things.
Well, it's a very curious technology, because when you read the Bible and it talks about bringing down the walls of Jericho, it said that they had the Ark of the Covenant, they blew trumpets, and the bricks turned into liquid. The whole wall just liquefied and melted. So what kind of technology could do that?
Sonic. And it, not only that, but it was supposedly providing manna, food.
Oh, food for them.
Food for them. Mm-hmm. Supposedly, you know, food, water, protection against their enemies, ways to defeat their enemies, supposedly a radio to God.
Ah.
So it's a multi-purpose device.
And were these German esoteric groups aware that there were 3 of them?
I believe one of them was destroyed, and there are 2 that are still present on the surface of the earth.
When you look at the Tibetan stories and you compare them with other records, in Tibet they have this thing called the double dorje, which you hold in your hand, and it looks like a weird energetic coil. And it seems to have been modeled off of a technology. When we go into the Greek mythology, we have Zeus's thunderbolt, which appears to be some device that he holds in his hand can generate lightning. We have Thor's hammer, which is the same thing. We have Poseidon's spear, which is the same thing. Were there particle beam weapons or some type of energy weapons that you could hold in your hand like a gun that these German groups were also trying to locate in these expeditions?
Yes, they believed very much that all of these descriptions of the gods were actual weapons, technological weapons, and they were looking for them.
Yeah, another one that comes out of India is Vajra's spear. It's the same kind of idea. He's holding it in his hand. It does incredibly powerful things.
Right. So they were looking for all of these things, and a lot of these beings that had these weapons that were being written about were, some were ETs and some were extremely advanced human breakaway civilizations, and presented themselves to the surface population as gods, and did so for some time. As we became more sophisticated, so did their deceptive techniques. And in more recent times, they've been presenting themselves as extraterrestrials that are benevolent and here to save the world.
Getting back to something you said before, do you think that the Germans could have acquired something like Zeus's thunderbolt or Vajra's spear and been able to engineer it into the building of their craft so they had an effective weapon?
I think that there were quite a bit of technologies that were acquired and integrated into their breakaway secret space program that they were developing, but they were developing this for their own breakaway civilization, and when it came down to it, did not care about World War II, the motherland, and using this technology to defeat the United States and the enemies of Germany that they were doing, that they were engaged in war with.
When we see giant stone structures like stone circles or single slabs like menhirs or pyramids, that kind of thing, obviously we can't work that kind of stone now in any effective way. Did the Germans find any technology that would allow you to, like, maybe hold on to a thing with your hands and zap a stone and allow it to levitate? Did they find anything like that?
A lot of this type of technology was discovered.
Really?
And it was discovered below the surface of the earth, deep in cavernous areas, and what has become known as the honeycomb earth, that a lot of people refer to as inner earth or the hollow earth. And a lot of this was technology left behind by the ancient builder race and also by ancient ETs and ancient breakaway groups that had moved on and left certain technologies behind.
I'm just curious because this is correlating with something I heard. The first insider I ever met had worked, apparently his godfather was one of the top 90 Cabal people, and he had described a technology that was based on crystals, and it actually was like a 6-gun, and you had 6 crystals in it in kind of a cylinder, and you'd pop them in, and you could rotate to each crystal depending on the size of the stone, and it would actually beam into the stone, and that would help it to levitate. I'm just wondering if you'd ever seen anything like that.
I've seen an incredible amount of technology that is based on crystals.
Really?
And a lot of it goes way back to the ancient builder race, and a lot of it has been developed by much younger Earth-based ancient races and ET races.
Very good. All right, well, we're going to continue this really fascinating discussion. It's interesting to get correlations and hear things from his perspective given his background. So when we come back next time, we're going to take this discussion of the German societies forward, and we're going to finally bring them out into space and start talking in very practical terms about where did they go, What did they find when they got there? And how did they build it out and make it their own? That's coming up next time on Cosmic Disclosure, because you need to know. I'm your host, David Wilcock. This is Corey Goode, and we thank you for watching. Forward, I withheld the information from the internet, and that makes it very easy to tell when someone else comes along who is speaking about the same things that I'd already heard. And I'm very delighted to have the opportunity now to finally be able to talk about so many things that were not allowed to be spoken of before, and have Corey here for the show. So Corey, thanks for being here, buddy.
Thank you.
We talked about Operation High Jump. We talked about the effort that was made to try to bust up a German cell in Antarctica, and that they encountered some pretty stiff resistance there. So I guess to start this off, what was the first method that they used to achieve spaceflight?
In the beginning, they had success with their own engineering beliefs. And they decided that they would follow these leads that they had received through channelings and go and locate these texts.
Did the beings that were doing the channeling give them specific coordinates of where these texts would be located?
Yes.
Really?
They told them that they were under certain mountain ranges in certain areas that had at one time been a part of a more advanced civilization, had been forgotten by modern man, that a lot of the religious caste monks knew about.
Where did they believe these texts were located? Were there a variety of locations?
A variety of locations. These being in the Tibetan areas, the areas of India. A lot of people have heard the stories of ancient flying devices that had very advanced weaponry.
The Vimana.
Yeah, the Vimana. And it read like science fiction, but was many tens of thousands of years old. And Western scholars wrote it off as fiction, science fiction ahead of its time. These German groups, they believed more in the marriage of science and esotericers, developing technology from their own engineering feats, as well as they had been scouring the East for ancient texts that they had been told about in channelings from what they were led to believe, or what could be off-world beings, that some of the esoteric German secret society groups were dabbling in. And this led some of the other secret society groups to go on expeditions looking for these ancient Eastern texts.
Hello, I'm David Wilcock, and welcome to another episode of Cosmic Disclosure, because you need to know. In this episode, we are going to pick up where we left off with this remarkable insider who we have privilege and pleasure of speaking to, none other than Corey Goode, who is claiming to have worked in something we are calling the secret space program. This would be the military-industrial complex industrializing and building out colonies in our solar system and beyond. And it is a fascinating story because it lines up with information that I received from insiders that I have been in contact with for the better part of 20 years. Most of these people never came forward.